watching and listening to Bishop Brothers, a safe space where real issues being dealt with by real people are brought forth and discussed. Every week, the fire of love is lit as two 21st century bishops share the first century church message. Join and engage in the conversation, featuring grassroots interviews, book reviews, and God-inspired commentary. Here are your hosts, Aaron and John, Bishop and Bishop, Chief and Chief. But above all, they are brothers. Welcome aboard.
There is redemption beyond our scars, beauty from ashes, a God who knows it all and redeems it all. What happened to the lives of a doubting friend, an infidel woman, a religious zealot, a lawyer, a woman at a well, and a traumatized apostle when they met Jesus? Through 6 inspiring stories with biblical protagonists, Scars, Encounters with Jesus shows you that no one can live a life free of scars, not even Jesus Christ. This eye-opening book helps you embrace your scars, acknowledge the strength that comes with every wound or failure, and eventually grow beyond them. Author Aaron Williams seeks to help you understand that scars are an inevitable life challenge, but this doesn't mean you should let them define you and prevent you from moving on. He aims to show you that everyone, even Jesus, has scars, and encourages you to start seeing them as proof of strength, not weakness. This book shows you that you are stronger than your past. Reading through the pages and seeing how the encounter with Christ transformed people's lives will help you connect with Jesus on a more personal level, while getting motivated by every story to get past your own scars. Over 200 copies have been pre-ordered. Get yours today. Available now on Amazon.
All right. It's already been a night.
That's it. Delayed but not denied.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh yeah.
Well, welcome to a little later show.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll call it Bishop Brothers After Hours. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah. So welcome, guys. And as you saw in the little video we had for you guys, I have finally figured out the name of Bishop Williams' book. It's called Scars. I just so y'all know, I figured it out. And yeah, so tonight we're going to talk about it. I think I'll just kind of interview you a little bit.
Yeah.
The first question I would ask is, kind of walk me through like where this idea came from, because the depth of this book and the different stories, it seems like this was a long time coming.
Yeah, it started with COVID. It's really because I remember right when we finished writing the story of Bishop Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
We both could start another book, right? So
right.
I started writing a book about. In my mind it was about COVID, and so I started writing that. But then, COVID really opened my eyes to a lot of things on me on a personal level, because my wife is a witness to this. COVID really, it really exposed me. It exposed me to wounds and things that I was in denial of, to the point that I started coming to the place where I needed to quit fronting and hiding and be and acknowledge who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was as far as like starting to get therapy.
Yeah.
Now I guarantee you, 2-3 years ago, I would never said that on like an open program like this.
Right.
But COVID really exposed a lot of what was going on, and I really found out for the first time in my life. Well, it was there, but I acknowledged for the first time in my life that I was dealing with PTSD.
Yeah. Yeah.
COVID exposed that because I was in denial about it. I was hiding. Oh, you're a preacher.
Mm-hmm. You
got the Holy Ghost. Because you're born again.
Oh yeah.
You're a believer. Where's your faith? You don't trust God.
Yeah.
And I got wounded. Serving in the military on an aircraft carrier. Not physically wounded, but I got mentally wounded, based on the situation that happened. And so those were wounds that I needed to become a scar. and that's how I came to scars, because wounds need to become scars so you can start healing. So I was on this path, and it took me down this path. Now I didn't know the name of the book, and then it was going to be Scars, but I knew that I had to come to a place where I acknowledge things that was going on in my life that my wife had seen for years, that she knew of, that I was in denial of, not being able to sleep, not talking about it. You know, the symptoms of PTSD, and you know, I'm to the point right now that I'll tell people that if you're going to a church that a pastor's not getting therapy, you might consider a different church, because it's not something to be denial about. And that's what this book, it really centers a lot on, that, you know, how, you know, we need to stop hiding,
right?
Yeah, faking.
Yeah, one of the things that always struck me about the scar, you know, long before I knew your book was named Scars, the thing that strikes me about scars is scars carry a memory, right? In my opinion, when I look at scars on my body from, you know, combat operations or from whatever, from knee surgeries, from basketball, there's a story behind every one of them, right? When they were wounds, they bled all over everybody, right? Like they were really nasty wounds, until I got until I received the treatment for those wounds to heal. Right now, I haven't read the book yet, so I don't, you know, I don't want to get into what you're already talking about. But for me, you know, my scars, they don't bleed anymore. They don't ooze anything anymore, right? But when I look at them, I remember those times, right? Fondly or negatively, whatever the case may be with the scar. But I'm just kind of curious, does your book kind of follow along those lines?
Yeah, most definitely. You know, scars are tattoos with better stories.
I can verify that. Right? I'm guilty.
With better stories. Scars are your stories. The beauty of the scar means that a healing has taken place, and whether you look back on that fond or negative, but it is either side of the ledger you're looking on is victory.
Right.
You've made it through it. You're on the other side. Dead people don't scar.
No, the wounds don't heal.
Wounds don't heal. Dead people don't scar. And so scars are good, a testimony. And we live in a world that we do everything in our power to hide our scars, to cover up our scars, to put makeup on our scars. And that's when I start getting to these stories. That's when I really, I feel so. And you talk about I feel so in love with the characters. They really took me, because I see myself on both sides of the ledger. I see myself in each one of them. They're so sharp, but they're so epic. A lot of times we think epic got to be this long, Ben-Hur 50-hour movie. No, it can be a short encounter with Jesus, but they're so epic in what happens.
Right.
And all these people that he encountered, that I talked about in this book, had scars and was dealing with scars and dealing with situations, and so it really drew me in to that. And it's funny how this thing came out. I really found out who I was as a writer. Before this, I wrote my memoir, and then the book with us is more about myself, what I was going through. This is the first time as an author I use characters. Okay. And I really found out from, you listen to a George R. R. Martin or Tom Clancy, and they used to always, I watch them do interviews, and they all say, I fell so in love with these characters. I'm like, man, you wrote a book. And now I can see what they meant. But you really get invested in these characters. You want to dig and find out more. And so a lot of times dealing with the Bible is so frustrating, biblical characters, because sometimes in the Moses you can go for days. I mean, there's a lot about Moses, but a lot of characters, particularly these, it's not a lot about it. And that's frustrating, because you fall so in love with them, and can you see yourself. So this was a really an experience for me. Yeah,
and so kind of touching on the whole. Characters from the Bible can be very hard to, because they're usually in there unless they're an epic character like Jesus Christ or Paul or Moses, Noah,
Isaiah, Daniel,
those type of characters have books dedicated to them in the Bible. So it's a lot easier to find the data within Scripture to kind of flesh those characters out. I'm curious with the woman at the well, we see her once in Scripture. Yeah. Right? We see her one time. Yeah. And although it's maybe described in a couple different places, this is one character that it's like the scope, it's like the camera of a lens. It's the lens of a camera, right? It just kind of passes over them as it follows Jesus, right? So it's a background character, but those characters are still so important. So what I'm curious about is, one, how did you flesh those characters out? And two, did you have to, for some of my stuff, like when I wrote Dig It Treacle, we're talking about Celtic theology, I did have to go out and rely, like when I spoke about St. Patrick, I had to rely on some folklore and tradition to flesh out that character, because there's only two things written by Patrick ever, right? And one's his confession, and then one's this letter he sends to an army that he's upset with. So we really don't have a ton. It's like this passing moment. So I'm just curious how you develop those characters.
Well, man, the woman of the world, I almost bring tears. She really, even when I think about it now, it brings tears to my eyes, because here's how I don't know how this happened, but I guess I went on each of these stories. I was like, you seen the Christmas Carol, right?
Of course, yeah.
And how Scrooge goes, the angel, the whoever takes him to, and he's watching his past event.
Yeah.
That's how, when I was writing this, God took me in the theater of writing this. I'm like, God took me to, in my picture, I'm seeing this woman who's a social outcast, who's not even loved hated by a community. No women. She's going to a well. Now, I knew a lot of background. Why are you going to a well at the heat of the great? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
She's from Samaria. Jesus is a Jew, and I'm watching this. I'm out here in the desert, watching her walk, and I'm like, why does she keep walking to it? Because she knows he's a Jew.
Right.
She knows, and something within her, you have to surmise that kept her moving forward, even though she could have been ridiculed. She could have been told, because Samaritans don't have anything with Jews.
Right.
So a lot of stuff, the history I knew, but seeing this story, and then you look at this encounter and this conversation that she had with this man that could have, called her a dog or cast her out, and how when she had that encounter, after that encounter, her whole life turned upside down. You're watching this epic situation happen in a very short time, just on a conversation. It shows you how she went there with her scars and wounds and everything else, and in that moment, Jesus transformed us, and I'm actually like I'm watching TV.
Right.
I'm showing it. So when I'm writing this, I'm like, wow, this is so important. We look at the conversation, and what I did find out is that I didn't know, after all this talking about this story, that Jesus spent more time there than anywhere. He spent 2 days there in her neighborhood, in her community, after this conversation with her, and how they was transformed. And so that's the whole thing. We go to God, and we have all these wounds and scars, and we might as well quit hiding, because he asked the question. If you knew who this was, you ask him for a drink. And then the one that gives me goosebumps, even when I think about right now, that I looking at in detail, when he said she knew the word. She knew. She said, I'm waiting on the Messiah. And one of the most coldest lines in Scripture, he said,
the coldest.
You're looking at him. And think about that. She's going to a well and meet this man, and then he sits right in the conversation. He says, I am the Messiah y'all been praying about and reading on. It's like, wow. And so that story, then I started looking for more, but that's the story. The name of the chapter is The Well. That's the story. It's like, wow, all this happened at a well, and it shows us how she came there with all this stuff, trying to hide, and social outcasts, and coming in the heat of the day. Everything was wrong about the situation, but it ended up so right. And that's what always happens with an encounter with God. And I think, wow, that's a So I wish, obviously, you don't get her name. I wish we knew her name, because the Bible is written patriotic. A lot of women don't have names, and
it's true.
But it's like he spent more time there than anywhere. And then the disciples come back. It's just such a I can just see it in my mind, and I feel so in love with her because I've been there.
Right.
I've been. How can I bring it to my life? How can I slip around John where I cannot be seen? Military.
Yeah.
How can I, be the chief but still keep my, when I was a first class, now I'm a chief, and I got to deal with all this stuff, all the dynamics that we deal with. We deal with in different ways, but we deal with all these peer pressure dynamic, and I'm an outcast, and if I don't do this and I'll do that, and and stuff like that. And we all been there. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
when you encounter Jesus, all that stuff doesn't matter because he knows anyway. And you're going to be transformed. So, yeah.
The the woman at the wells has always been a very interesting story. It's one of those stories where someone who would say that Jesus never claimed divinity. Well, he certainly claims to be the Messiah in that moment.
That was
whether you consider that a divinity claim or not.
Yeah.
I would personally, but so kind of walk us through. I guess the second thing is what led you to choose the character, because there's plenty of characters strewn throughout the Bible with scars.
Yeah.
Did you specifically want characters that had moments with Jesus?
Yeah.
Like, we stuck in the New Testament, and if so, like, why pick them?
Because I see myself in all of them. Stones, and I got that's the one that people don't want to hear about. This part, that's the one I've seen myself on both sides of the ledger. I've seen myself drug before men, false, wrong, but then the other person was wrong. But what really hit my heart on that is I've always looked at it from the point of view of, these men were wrong, they shouldn't have done this, but how many times I've had stones, casting a stone. I took myself. It happened in the Second Temple, so I started looking at the Second Temple where Jesus was teaching that day, and back to my Scrooge moment. I'm in this. God took me to. I'm thinking about how I put this together. God took me to this courtyard. I'm watching all these men. I'm looking at it. Drag this poor woman without the man before Jesus. It is always about, except the woman at the well, because it's just her and him. But it's always about trapping him. It was never about. And I'm seeing myself. God showed me your self-righteous. He showed me with a stone in my hand, ready to cast.
Wow.
Not just looking at the woman. That's easy.
Right.
You're wrong. It wasn't about justice. It was about them. But you got a stone in your hand.
Yeah.
How many times have you had a stone in your hand?
Yeah.
And you can say we can try to get out of it.
No.
But we can do it like passive aggressively.
Do the mental gymnastics.
It don't have to be like you just want to. It just way you treat people, the way you act. You don't have to say it. It can be you have in your mind. You can cast stones at people and condemn them without self-righteousness. And that's when I wrote about grace. See, grace for me, but the law for thee.
Yeah, that's right. That's
when God gave me that.
Yeah.
Grace for me. But John, you always got to have a law. See, I need grace. See, it's easy for me to say grace, but when I need grace, but when you need grace, no, I want to be this legal eagle. I want the law. The Moses law says this. The government says this.
Yep.
Let me cast a stone, and that's why I said no. It's about grace because grace is an unmerited favor of God, and that's what Jesus showed them when he said he wrote on the ground, and I had to put my stone down. And he's teaching me, and this says, it's one thing for me to have scars, but how many wounds have I caused? See how many wounds have I caused?
The wild thing about the woman at the well, theologically, like you said, it's really easy to be the woman, right?
The one stoned,
the one that's about to get stoned, right?
The one caught in adultery,
right? The one caught in adultery. I'm sorry, not the woman at the well.
Yeah,
the one caught in adultery, right?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting how, as Christians, and I'm guilty. I think every Christian's guilty of this. We read that story and we only see it one-dimensionally.
We don't see no stones.
No, we see us as the woman at the well, and Jesus comes and saves us.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about that story, and I think you did it in the book, is there's forgiveness on both sides. Right? Yes. Jesus had to do that, not just for the forgiveness of the woman, but I honestly think, and the people may not like this. This is a Johnism. But John thinks when Jesus says, "Go and sin no more," I really think Jesus was speaking loud enough so that the crowd could hear it too, right? Because what were they doing?
Yes.
And so I think he gives grace freely, right? Yes. Both to the stone caster and the one that might receive the stone.
Yeah.
So I think in that moment, and that's a really good point, that as much as I'd love to be, as I want to pretend to be the woman about to get stoned, right? The reality is probably more times than not, I have been on the other side of that. And definitely before deconstruction and when I was, very staunchly into evangelical circles and fundamentalist Christianity, I threw stones at everybody.
Yeah.
But I would throw stones and be like, "Oh, I'm wounded. I need grace."
Yes.
But I'm here wounding people, but I need the grace.
Yeah. It's amazing how the thing that we always need, we all need all the time is grace, unmerited favor of God, and we struggle to give it.
Right.
And we all need it at any moment.
Right.
We might need grace. It's like, but why do we struggle? And that's self-righteousness, and that's what it was. And then when she left, here's the part that people not gonna like too, is because we got a lot of people talking about, well, Jesus didn't condemn her. He didn't condemn her, but he did judge her, because he said, "Go and sin no more." That was a judgment.
He said she was wrong.
He said, "I don't condemn you."
Right.
See, we tie, what we do is we tie them together, and they're two separate things.
Right.
We never have a viable justification to condemn anybody.
Right.
But we're supposed to judge them.
Right.
And then the judgment says, okay, do it in a godly way. Okay, he says, go and sin no more. Why is that erased? Because that's accountability. God's grace doesn't erase accountability. And this is why we have struggled with grace, because some people think that, well, grace of God. No, God's grace don't erase. It's just grace. But it's still an accountability factor.
Right.
And if we erase the accountability factor, then we're not talking about anything.
Right. And then I'm always drawn to the part where the Pharisees look at Jesus and they say, "The law says this. What do you say?" Right. I don't know how many times I've used a very similar thread of questioning, and I've said, "Well, the Bible's clear on this. Right? The Bible's clear. Women shouldn't preach." Right. I mean, I that has come out of my mouth, and I've meant it before. Right. The Bible's clear on this. But I think what Jesus does is he kind of flips that a little bit, and he says, yes, Scripture may say this. What I'm telling you is, right? And you have to remember, half the Bible wasn't written at this point.
Right.
The second half, the second act wasn't written yet.
Right.
Okay, it may say this, and he says it multiple times. A new commandment I give you, right? I'm giving you. Listen to me, because this is new, right? This is going to be something novel, and if you look at Jewish law in Palestine at that time, it was very novel to say, "Go and sin no more." Let somebody off the hook. That was a novel idea, right? That was a revolutionary idea.
And what people don't realize too is that it was not only a Mosaic law that they was trying to trap in, it was also a Roman law. Because if Jesus would have told them to green light them to kill her, he'd have been breaking Roman law also.
That's fact.
The people don't really, now that's why I really learned more about it when I started digging into, this was just more than just a theological law. This was a cultural thing he was dealing with too. Traps, and I thought about the writer of Doom, Frank Herbert, traps within traps. This was all about trapping Jesus both ways. They thought they had him in a double trap.
Right. They thought he had no escape.
See, yeah.
and he got him.
That's good, yeah.
So you have the woman at the well. Yeah. You have the woman caught in the act of adultery. Who else you bring in?
My second one I owe to my mock trial team, and I want to get them because when I looked at this story, I looked at it in a way that I never thought I would look at it when I started saying, I need another character to encounter Jesus, but in a different way. This was the lawyer that stood up and asked Jesus a question.
Okay.
And you know the person, you had the person in your life, right? They always get the last word.
Oh man, we live in Texas. That's Texas in general.
And so, two things. When my coach comes to train my attorneys, never. This is lawyer 101. Never answer a question you don't know the answer to.
That's solid. Solid.
But then the second push-over says, don't ask too many questions. When you look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's easy to go to the story. It's easy to go to what happened on the road and stuff like that.
Right. But
how did we get there? And the reason why we got there is because of the second question. See, he was all right with the first.
Yeah.
Remember? What he asked the first? He asked Jesus a question, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus says, well, he actually read. He said, you're a lawyer, how does it read? And he said, love of God. And then he asked that's the name of the title. This chapter, second question.
The second question.
Who is my neighbor? Then he got the story
that
is helped lives through the ages.
Right.
The parable of the Good Samaritan. And it's like us. Why do we ask God questions we don't answer to? Because He always going to lead us back to. But He was again trying to trap Jesus into a position where I want to be tribal. He wanted to trap you and say, okay, the person you're next to is your neighbor. No, your neighbor is the person who needs you at that moment.
Right.
Who needs you is not the person who lives in your neighborhood,
Right.
who you know, who you like, the person. Your neighbor is a person when you've been in a position that you are able to do something about and you don't. This is what we don't want to hear.
Yeah.
We're able to do something about it and we don't, and we trap behind, well, that's not my tribe, that's not my race, that's this. We say all the political correct things. But your neighbor is so, and so the Good Samaritan was a neighbor, but it was the second question that trapped this lawyer trying to trap Jesus into help understand, using a Samaritan again, that hey, he was the one that showed.
Yeah. And I think that's a really deep and heavy lesson that we need as a country right now.
Yeah.
Is, who is our neighbor? I think, that's one of the things I love about Gen Z. Gen Z don't play, right? You got to come with it. You better have your facts in order. You better don't try to play me with some theatrics, because I'll just leave. I'll vote with my feet and I'll walk away. Right. And honestly, that's why the church is hemorrhaging young people right now, because they're just not going for it anymore. Yeah. The theatrics and the tropes ain't working anymore, right? And one of those tropes is the answer to the question, who is my neighbor? Right? The old church wants you to believe your neighbor is the person sitting next to you in the pew.
Yeah.
Whereas Jesus is, I think, pretty clear. Your neighbor is whoever needs you in that moment. Yeah. Right? And they're likely not sitting next to you in the pew. They don't look like you. They don't believe like you. They're not the same. They're not the same nationality as you. And I think Gen Z realizes that. Yeah. They realize that.
Here's what I learned too, that you never want to ask God a question. Don't, because you're gonna get an answer. 9 times out of 10, you're gonna get an answer that you don't want. And one thing I found out about this: 10 out of 10 times, the people that we hate, God still loves.
Right. And you actually bring up a really good point, because this actually goes back to the casting of stones. One of the things that I had to learn, and I'm still learning, I think I'm still guilty of it. I still do this. And if you follow me on TikTok, I still do this, right? I have this, so I came out of this fundamental background, and I no longer believe those things anymore. But I'm very judgmental. I can freely admit that I'm very judgmental of people who still hold those beliefs. But I have to remember, right? One, that's still my neighbor. Whether I think that they're really a Christian or not, right? That's not for me to decide. Right. But the other thing is, I also have to remember they grew up like I did, right? Like that was the only thing they knew. And coming out of that is terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying to come out of a place of absolute certainty on everything. Because that's what fundamentalism provides to you, is absolute certainty all the time, right? And when you deconstruct out of that and you come into a true faith with Christ, very few things are certain, right? Yes. And so, but I have to remember, like, they may be scared of this. Like, they may have questions, and they're not going to say it out loud, because then you have to admit you're wrong, and that, trust me, that's really hard to do. Yeah. But I have to give them grace too. Even though I vehemently disagree with them, I think I think their theology is toxic. I think it's dangerous. But I still have to remember, behind that theology is still an image bearer of God, right? And even if I don't agree, and that applies to a huge gambit of things, but this is the thing I focus on. I have to remember that I need to afford grace there, because Christ afforded me grace when I was there. So again, right? I want to be the adult. I want to be the adulterer. Yeah. Right. I want to be the Samaritan. When in reality, I'm really, evidence would suggest I'm more like the lawyer and the people with stones in their hands. Yeah. So,
there's one thing I learned. The biggest takeaway I learned from this book is grace. Grace is like the air we're breathing right now. Mm-hmm. Me and you are so-called doing a good thing, but the gangster is breathing air too.
Right.
It's based on humanity. It's not marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we gotta understand, grace is ours. It's not based on merit. It's based on God allowing a person to breathe, and it's His to give, His to take away. We have no control over God's grace. and that's what we don't like, because
Right.
we want God to be like us and not
Right.
not hold him accountable, but don't give him grace, and
Right.
that's the problem we have.
Yeah.
God gonna do grace.
Definitely. All right, so we got a lawyer, we got
Yeah.
the woman at the well,
Yeah.
and we got the woman caught in the act of adultery. You said there's 5?
We get 6.
There's 6?
Well,
Okay.
then I go to where it started in front. I wrote about Thomas, how Thomas has
Oh,
taken
he's my
such
favorite.
a big hit about doubting, and I like that about, because I love Thomas because he refused to believe something his friends were telling him until he seen it for himself.
Right.
And
Right.
we have, I think, wrongly put Thomas in a position where we have judged him wrongly and harshly, because Thomas was in that moment. Thomas had lost his friend. Thomas had seen Jesus get beat, wounded, suffer on a cross, pierced in his side. He's seen all this. And we say he don't have any faith because he doubted what his friends were telling him, that a man that he just seen get destroyed 3 days earlier. We need to back off that, because Thomas is more like us than we want to imagine, because what do we believe without seeing?
Right.
What do we, are we really going to believe that the person we seen got destroyed, that they rose from the dead?
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, I like Jesus' reaction to Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus didn't say, you're a doubter. Jesus didn't say, I'm going to cast you away. Jesus didn't say, go away from me because you doubted me. He said, no, here, put your hand.
Right.
Put your
Right.
hand. He received him in love. He understood and loved his doubt. He said, it doesn't, I understand how you feel. I understand that I probably would think the same way. Here, touch me, Thomas.
Right.
If this is what you need, touch me.
Right.
See, we're not like Jesus. When people are, we want to, if they don't believe like we do, we want to cast them away and say they're down or do something else. No, Thomas was more realer, because it's easy for them to say it, because they had seen, this man had not seen it, so he needed a different type of evidence.
Right.
And it's okay. Sometimes people, I've learned in that, and I'm watching this because I'm watching the scene, and I'm in the theater of my mind, like script, when I'm saying, and I'm thinking about, everybody's not going to believe like you. And it's okay. It doesn't mean they're doubt. Some people need different type of evidence. Sometimes to get to light, you got to touch the darkness.
Yeah.
Thomas needed to see, and in my study, a lot of theologians have backed off that track of doubting Thomas as if it's some bad thing. Say, you know what? This is who I can really relate to more
Right.
in all of them.
Yeah, and I think well, one, yeah, I think Thomas definitely gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
But I think of all the people in that room, he's the most honest.
That's the point.
You know what I mean? And he's
Yeah.
saying what he's feeling out loud.
Yes.
And he hadn't seen yet, so it's really easy. Again, that kind of goes back to my situation. Like I've seen quote unquote the light.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've read Dr. Cone. I understand now that the gospel is more about liberation than it is about restriction. You know, I understand these things. So Jesus has already walked in the room. I've seen him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But there's a doubting Thomas out there that hasn't seen him, hasn't read the things I've
Right.
read, hasn't done the things I've done,
Right.
hasn't deconstructed the way I have, right?
Right.
And so now it's easy for me to sit over here and go, you're such a doubter, right? What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
But Jesus every time says, because he did it for me.
Right.
Hey, come on, come step out of this boat, right?
Yeah.
Trust me. You know, and then in John, when Jesus says, you've seen me and you believe, more importantly are people who haven't seen me yet still believe, right? So even Jesus firmly understood
Yeah.
that.
Right. What is that?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So yeah, it's easy for, it's like you and us.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have as much faith? If you want to play this faith game as a cancer survivor, I doubt it.
Doubtful, yeah.
Do I have much faith as a person who's been? See, we got to be careful when we say, it's not until you try it about it, and I think people need to back off him. And I wrote about that, how Thomas wouldn't front. Thomas didn't fake. He said, "No, I don't believe y'all. Young commandment, I don't believe y'all." And we need to have people. To your point, we need to have people be comfortable with saying they don't believe us.
Mm-hmm.
They have to see some things.
Yeah.
They have some things got work out, and it's okay. And that doesn't mean that they're anti-God.
Right.
It means they just need something more, and that's fine. And God is we serve a God in the Jesus who will give them to what they need. Touch and see something. Yeah.
So who's next?
So then the Breakfast on the Beach.
Breakfast.
Okay. Let me do the other one. It's Nicodemus.
Oh, that's a good
and
one.
And I call this night moves. You know how Nicodemus snuck at night.
He did.
And I seen myself as a man and him, sneaking around at night. This man sneaking at night because he's a zealot. He's this to have a conversation with Jesus, and a conversation that changed his life. And sometimes to touch the light, we gotta enter the darkness to touch the light. And Nicodemus is a powerful story of, you know what? Jesus knew what he was doing, but Jesus still had a conversation with him. Jesus, when people encountered Jesus, their situations became irrelevant. Unlike us, when people encounter us, they got to look a certain way, come a certain way. We got these things all manufactured in our mind that they got to be, and we miss the moment of helping people. Jesus knew what he was doing. Jesus knew that he had a reputation. Jesus knew he couldn't do this in the daytime. So Jesus said, you know what? I'm not worried about what you're trying to do. I'm in the moment, in this encounter, I'm going to help you. And I see myself, how many times are we sneaking around? What if people seen our night moves?
Ooh, yeah. And are we going to see Jesus?
Yeah, we're going to see.
Probably not.
We're going to see Jesus. See, his name was going to see Jesus, and so he made night. And Nicodemus is such a good. And then to the end, where Nicodemus, what I found going into deeper, how he was there with Jesus, and he converted. He came converted from that experience. He was always transformed. So Nicodemus always how you know what, man. I can see myself just sneaking around, and I can see him at night just sneaking, putting on his clothes, putting on his hoodie. They didn't call hoodies back then, and going down there and sneak. And Jesus holding the audience with him, just powerful stuff.
And I think that definitely resonates with a lot of people who are leaving these toxic theologies, right? Because at first, and again, right, like completely guilty of this. I'm a lead pastor. I'm fronting, right? I'm definitely fronting. I'm telling these people, what the denomination says I'm supposed to say, and I'm saying the words. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, man, I'm a fraud because I'm not really buying into some of this, right? Yeah. And so it would feel like I would listen to some of the podcasts. Like I listen to this podcast called The Bible for Normal People. Now, I don't agree with everything they say, but that's the whole point of their podcast, right? Is they bring out a bunch of different views of Scripture so that you can, see what else is out there besides this fundamental take. And I tell you, Bishop, the same place when we first started doing Bishop Brothers, that office, I would go in there, I would turn off the lights so no one knew the pastor was in there, right? And I'd hit play and I'd listen to the Bible for Normal People, right? Because I was terrified if people found out, right? And so, that definitely strikes a nerve with me.
Same way with our PTSD. Same way with pastors not being honored. You're making night moves. You're trying to hide who you are.
Working on night moves,
trying to hide it. And Jesus is there waiting on you. Saying, you know what? It doesn't matter how low you turn on the lights. I can still see you.
Right.
Nicodemus, I know who you are.
Yeah.
You must be born again. I know you're a zealot, but in the end, this is truth.
Yeah. Man, that's
Breakfast on the Beach.
That's a word.
That's one. This is with my brother Peter. That's when Jesus rose. I think what I want to try to tell people how there's a mentality, there's a picture set in people's mind. It's amazing to me when you think about it. Jesus was scourged, whipped, thrown in his head, beat, and for some reason we think that the resurrection erases the trauma of Good Friday,
right?
Both physically and is it in the mindset when Jesus resurrected? He resurrected with a divine, glorified, unmarked body. And Thomas shows that he wasn't.
That's not true. Yeah.
So, but in our mindset, we think of resurrection that this is pristine, unmarked Jesus. No, Jesus. This is my first line. Jesus rose with scars. I have scars, and you have scars.
Yeah.
Because he rose with scars,
right.
And the disciples, out of all the ugliness he wrote, can you imagine how he looked? They still was glad to see him,
right?
Scars and all, And so when he went to the beach and he called Peter and them to the beach to have rest with them, that's when Peter had his therapy session. Yeah. So your pastors that have therapy, you might not want to read this, but because therapy session, Jesus had to have a therapy session. Peter didn't need a sermon. Peter didn't need another Holy Ghost meeting. Peter needed revival. Peter needed to be restored to understand that even though he failed, even though he not, and the symbolization of that, where Jesus made coals and Peter denied him in front of coals, is a symbolism to that, how Jesus almost set up the same scene. I'm going to put you almost in the same place that was your worst moment in your life, and now this is going to be messed because I am still telling you that I need you. You have scars. I know you wounded, but here's prayer therapy. Feed my sheep. Yeah. He had a therapy session I'm saying, Pastor. Yeah, I said a therapy session. Yes, I know you talk about the Peter on the day of Pentecost, but go back to this Peter who needed a therapy session with somebody he denied. And that somebody happened to be Jesus Christ to his face. Right. Knowing that he was lying. Right. This man needed therapy. And this one really resonated with me because pastors, you need therapy. I need therapy, and your people need therapy, and you need to start preaching and ministering them to get therapy. And pastor, you're not the one to provide it. That's right. Jesus can do all things.
Right, you ain't Jesus.
And when you ain't Jesus, Jesus can do therapy. He can do whatever he wants to do. Right. So don't talk about they try to you're not Jesus.
You're not Jesus.
But Jesus had a therapy session and restored Peter to the point that he told Peter how he was going to die. Yeah. Yeah. And Peter said, you know what, he's still with 11. And so the breakfast on the beach is so much can happen on in our pulpits, right? At our tables, right? Quit inviting people to church so much. Invite them to a meal, right? Talk to people, right? That's an encounter with God. That's an encounter that you can talk to people and that you can lead people. Very few life-changing moments happen over. Yeah, I know y'all love your preaching and the hearing, but life-changing moment. Right. At that beach, Peter, who was getting ready to go back to his old life changed again until he was the one that preached the message on the day of Pentecost. Yeah. You gotta look at both Peter, but Peter, think about this, and I get to Peter was looking at resurrected Jesus, scarred Jesus, wounded Jesus.
Right. Disfigured Jesus.
Disfigured Jesus. Yeah. Jesus, I wrote in the book, was some way disabled. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I said that. And like he was disabled. He was not his self, but he was still providing that man. We're called to be healing priests to one another. Mm-hmm. We can heal one another. Yeah. But we can't heal one another because we're so busy trying to cope. Jesus didn't go to the Hollywood makeup room and say, "Make me over. I gotta look a certain way for my disciples to see me." No, you're gonna see me. That's right. You're gonna see me as I am. Right. And that's what started. Anytime Jesus was never afraid to bear, show, reveal, expose his scars, his vulnerability to people. Right. And it caused healing. So
yeah, I think two things about Peter and breakfast. I might have called it breakfast at Tiffany's, but breakfast, right? How many times did Peter deny Jesus? Yeah, three times. Yeah. How many times did Jesus ask him, "Do you love me?" Yeah. 3 times. There's restoration that's occurring, right? There's a restorative moment in Peter's life. The second thing is when we think about the early church. See, we have these rose tinted glasses, and I think when we think early church, we think, like the Catholic symbolism, these cathedrals where people went, or at least some sort of building where people went, right? But the reality is these churches, like Ephesus, was probably no more than 30 people. Yeah. And they were meeting around a table in someone's house. Yeah. They had dinner, then they would have a word, and then they would celebrate communion, right? Like, that was church. And you look at that, and we also, I don't know how many pastors, we're going back to the first century church. Yeah. Are you? Yeah. I don't think you are, and I don't think you understand the cost of going back to the first century church, because all these lights, all this stuff, it has to go away, right? We're not going to be in these big meeting places anymore. Matter of fact, your church is going to have to split into pieces to meet at houses, right? Now, I'm not saying leave your church and go have a house church, because modern house churches ain't the old. Right. You can be ridiculous with some of these house churches. You need to be nervous, right. But. The fact of the matter remains. So when we think about the intimacy of the first century church. Like we kind of drop that. We kind of forget that part.
Yeah. Well, that's why I say this book is not a book of religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book. That's why I made sure I put encounters with Jesus, because it's about relationship with Him. Mm-hmm. Is all that matters. And the final chapter is witness. When I just talk about, we're called to be a witness. We're called to be witnesses. And they said a cloud of witnesses, and that's ultimately what we're called to be a witness of the transformational life of Jesus Christ in our encounter with Him, and understanding we don't have to hide our scars and our wounds, because that's who we are. That's your victory. Yeah. Don't hide your victory. Don't hide what you overcome, and you don't have nothing to be ashamed of. It means that you've overcome, and you can walk in victory. And the last point I want to make on is how I came with the how it really led me. I got to give a shout out to my kids, because they really was the genesis that God allowed them to use to get me down this road. Mm-hmm. I teach school, right?
Yeah.
And so I go to school and I got my mask on, right?
Right.
I'm the teacher,
yeah.
Professional, right? Gotta be. And so, just out of the blue, he said, "What's wrong, Chief?" I said, "What? Nothing. Nothing." And they go, I start teaching something. They come, "Oh, Chief, what's wrong?" I said, "No." And I said, you laugh. You do it.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing,
well, I've played this game.
Nothing
nothing's wrong with me.
But you see, my Gen Z, kids is different. Mm-hmm. I play with adults, but adults really don't. They'll play the okay and move on, because they don't really care.
Not kids.
But so I'm like, nothing. Mm-hmm. Then 15 minutes, no, Chief stop. They said, "What's wrong?" And I was actually having and I was like, how do these kids see this? What am I giving? And I started doing the indoctrinated thing that I'm not doing a good job. I shouldn't, and I got to be the professional.
I can't believe they see this in me.
It's because my kids, because you've been around them so much, they know your spirit.
Yeah.
And they know when you're faking.
Right.
And this led me to write in my acknowledgement. It's the thing that the problem with our society is, and the church particular, we need to quit faking being okay.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Yeah. Sure
it's too much work. Just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Because your people who really know you know when you put on the fake.
That's true.
But when you think about it, it is foolish to have dealing with grief to act like you're happy. It's food. God gave us tears just as much as He gave us laughter. Right. God, it's a book called Lamentations as much as a book called Psalms.
There you go.
Okay,
yeah, that's right.
And so, but to the kid, how they push me, like it's just exhausting, faking being okay. And we need to stop that. Pastors, y'all need to stop this in the church, in the Lord's house. That's where it happens the most. In the Lord's church, you're sitting in that line because you're not okay.
Right.
But you're faking being okay because you're the pastor,
right.
or you're the missionary, or you're the deacon, or you're this, or you're this and that. And so you got to put on this front, because you can't do therapy. You can't talk about real issues. You can't have your scars. You can't show wounds. You can't show vulnerability. And here we're talking about Jesus, who rose with all His scars, Good Friday, resurrection, and erased the trauma of what He went through. But yet we live in a world that everything about us is fake. And it's exhausting. And this is why the trouble from this book that God said, the trouble with our society is this faking being okay. This song, "I'll Make You Over," it sounds good, but it's the makeovers. Let's cover it up. Let's do this. And that's why I wrote this book, because it's not a book about religion. It's about, scars.
Right.
And that's why, to your, I wasn't trying, that's why, as somebody taught me that when I started going on a book, he said, don't tell people that title the book for release. I said, why? He said, because in our society, because he does his books, in our society, people have preconceived notions.
Yeah.
And they would look at that title and they would shut it down without giving a chance. He said, don't release it. And I've been wanting to get to this point. I'm talking about this so bad. Don't release it. He said, thinking about it, and this is revelation. Hey, he said this. I just looked at him like, he's like, wow, I know that's deep. Thinking about it like your child been born. The day your wife told you you was pregnant, you want to see that baby, right? Did you see it? No, sir. because you couldn't have seen it because the baby wouldn't have lived.
Right. That's a fact.
I'm like, wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Now you made it make sense.
Yeah.
No matter how bad we want to see it, and then sure as it got closer, but 6 months, she wasn't ready.
Right.
I wanted to see Rachel, like in Candace.
Sure.
But I had to wait.
Yeah.
To give it proper birth. And
Right.
they said when you release titles, particularly if you know how to, they do, but they have people don't realize that the big writers, they have people who they do focus groups. That is this a good title with this word?
Yep.
Before they release to the public,
Yep.
believe me, that's all that's done in the background
Yeah.
before you see it. Because if you get a bad title, they say, oh, you don't release this because of time. But he said, wait, and that's why I did that because I didn't. I just said, what should I call it? Just book inspiration. That's what I did because people, and you know what is true. Like 4 or 5 people told me, say, the chief, if you told me the title of the book before, I wouldn't have bought it. But so that was my reason for doing that. But
Okay.
yeah, it's out there now on Amazon. So I hope you check it out. But it really was a later on just, and now it's got me to the point where I'm gonna be releasing another book next year. This is gonna be dedicated to my mom. I already got that in my mind. What I'm gonna be doing is give myself a break here, but start revving that back up in January, February, and just
There you go.
keep it
And
moving.
there's going to be a book signing soon.
Yeah, book signing Sunday.
On Sunday,
at the chapel. Then we're gonna have one at the library, at the school library. They let me do it at the school. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, on the next Wednesday we're gonna have one in my school library. So I'm gonna give them a book. They want a book for the library. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. You think they'll put my book in there?
oh yeah.
You really?
Yeah, as long as they got. Oh yeah, shoot, they got. Oh yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Do you think a high school would put a
Yeah.
book with the title "Exchanging Greenness for Whiteness"
Yeah.
in the library?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's I believe it's worse titles than that.
I don't.
They got-
This I have no doubt.
They got Hitler's book in there.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Yeah, so
I'm sure they do.
Oh yeah.
I have no doubt about that.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, definitely pick up a copy. It's
Yeah.
it's on Amazon. And if you're in the San Antonio area, the book signing is going to be
Sunday 11:30.
Sunday 11:30 at the chapel. We'd love to see you there. I know Aaron would be excited to sign a book for you. So
Oh yeah.
thanks for checking us out tonight. Next week, we're going to kind of do the same thing, except we're going to do it on my book.
That's right.
That's right.
I'm
Yeah.
good. Yeah. Break
Which
it down.
where I find your book very inspirational. My book is almost the opposite. It'll stab you.
Yeah.
It'll make you feel it'll definitely make you feel uncomfortable. And but there's a good point to it, and there's a realization. It was a realization that happened to me over time, and for other Irish Americans out there, I think it's important to hear.
Uncomfortable is good because a lot of things in this book is uncomfortable too because people don't want to hear about they put on the front. People don't like hearing that, and so each book, what I've learned and what people need to understand, each book is not everything is an adaptation. This is my adaptation of these encounters with Jesus. Somebody else can take the same subjects and write a whole different book, and nothing's wrong or right about it. It's just the adaptation. And so I think we need to get back to reading books because if you're a reader, you're a writer.
Right.
And you got to listen to the message behind because we are not getting it from the mainstream media. We're not getting it from social media. So I believe it's going to be coming back to books is going to be the source of wisdom because you're not getting on the media because they're all political platform. No matter what side of the ledger you're on, it's all an agenda.
Yep.
And my book is an agenda too, but my agenda is based on helping you to try to see that you're scarred. So I freely say that your book is agenda too, but it's trying to show you how things change in the dynamic of the society because our history shows us who we are, and we need to find out who we are. So both of these books, two different ways of doing things, but both of these books will help and uplift because I always go back to it. What if we didn't have the Bible is not a fairy tale. Mm-hmm. Have you read it lately? Last night, it's not a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Everything is not, wine and roses. There's a lot of thunder and lightning in there.
Yeah.
Death, destruction, and mayhem.
Yeah, that's a fact.
in that book, so
That's a fact.
it takes all kinds of genres for us to.
Yep.
For us, but we're trying to be writers because we understand that one day we're not going to be here,
Yeah.
And I thank God we got Martin Luther King,
Bonhoeffer.
Wilbur Wilford,
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass, people like that. I thank God they left behind their writings, because if they did, what would we have?
We wouldn't even know.
So,
yeah.
So you're right.
That's right. All right. Well, next week I think we're doing Tuesday night.
Yeah, Tuesday.
It'll be our last episode before the Christmas break, and then we'll get started again in January, making pastors uncomfortable.
Yeah.
All right. Till next time.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Bishop Brothers. Make sure to visit our page, Bishop Brothers, where you can like and follow so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, please tell a friend about the show. The brothers salute you. Until we meet again, Godspeed.